Can your employer legally force you to come into the office? Every employer is saying remote work is the death of productivity. Every worker is saying if I can just have that little less time commuting, I can be just as productive at home. Not everyone is going to have to climb Mount Everest to land the most basic of entry-level positions. Is working from home a dream of the past? Welcome to the Crossover Connections with Jack Wang podcast. My name is Jack. I'm a scientist, college professor. Working from home is becoming less and less normal, and there is no bigger headline that indicates this than this article from the BBC where Zoom, the company that allowed all of us to talk on the internet using teleconferencing very efficiently for the last several years, Zoom is now ordering workers back to the office. If Zoom is saying remote work is not to their taste, that kind of gives the signal and plants a flag on the ground. No company really has to offer remote work policy if even Zoom is moving away from that option. This has been one of the biggest gripes that I've seen for everyone who talks about work on any kind of online platform. Every employer is saying remote work is the death of productivity. Every worker is saying if I can just have that little less time commuting, if I can just a bit more freedom, I can be just as productive at home as I am in the office. So why is this tension arising again and again? This idea of the in-person workplace being so much better than remote work is a little lost on young people, on millennials, on Gen Z, because they just don't have that much choice. They often are on the lowest rung in the workplace hierarchy, and they don't really get a say about whether they can come to work or they can work from home. Parents who have kids, who have other responsibilities, or maybe they've got to look after their own parents, working from home is a very, very big plus to our productivity because we have developed the cachet to drive our own to-do list at work, and we can do that very effectively at home online. We know how to be self-directed drivers of our own autonomous working conditions. If you're a young person though, I think this is very dicey. You need to be seen, rightly or wrongly, as kind of the first person in and the last person to leave. You're just an unknown quantity. People just see you and think you're very young and very inexperienced. If you're not physically there, no one knows your value. No one knows what your output is. And it is very difficult for you to move ahead. The bosses in all these companies, they are still from an older generation where remote work is not a thing that they equate with productivity. If they don't see you, they don't put a face to the name, you will not be perceived as someone that's very valuable to the company, and you will hit a ceiling in your current role sooner rather than later. Irrespective of perceptions, can your employer actually force you to come back into the office, whether you like it or not? This article from the ABC goes to this exact topic. Can Australian employers stop you working from home? Here's what the law says. Whether you are employed permanently as a casual or on a short-term contract in Australia, you are required to follow lawful and reasonable directions from your employer. Even if this isn't stated specifically anywhere, in Australia, our courts have ruled this requirement is implied in every employment contract. The question then becomes, is coming back to work in a physical space lawful and reasonable? Let's say another quarantine measure comes down and forces social isolation, and your employer still forces you to come back into the office. That is not lawful, nor is it reasonable. If you can perform your role at home and have a legitimate reason to do so, let's say you're sick or you've got a lot of mobility issues, then you may have grounds to argue that returning to the office, while it is lawful, it is not reasonable. Failing to comply with this direction can be a valid reason to dismiss you or fire you. So sadly, in Australia, if your employer forces you to come into work physically, you have to comply with that direction. So that is not a very satisfying response. If you're a new graduate looking for work, you're finding out that the employer has all the power in these arrangements and flexibility is just a bit of a myth. And this is exacerbated by the fact that the cost of living, certainly in Australia, is going up and up. So amidst all of this financial pressure, amidst all of this lack of power in negotiating different working arrangements, it comes back to being good enough at your job to leverage and negotiate the right type of role in the right type of environment for yourself. And it comes back to good old communication skills at the end of the day. This is the skill set that will help you leverage and negotiate the next role up that hierarchy, where eventually you get to decide what kind of job you do and where you do it. And this article is from CNBC, which is a really good resource. This is the best answer I've ever received to tell me about yourself after 20 years of interviewing. The first question in many of these job interviews is, tell me about yourself. And that is a wide open question that you can answer in a number of ways. It is also an invitation to really put as much into that answer as possible, as opposed to making it very vague and open-ended. This article comes from a recruiter who worked in the world's largest executive search firm, who's conducted thousands of interviews over the past 20 years. And the best and most memorable answer this person has ever received to the question, tell me about yourself. I've climbed the highest mountains on every continent, including Everest. Not everyone is going to have to climb Mount Everest to land the most basic of entry-level positions. But that answer does reveal a little something about the approach of these search firms in trying to find applicants that stand out, because you will have to stand out if you've agreed to come in for an interview, assuming that it's not an interview conducted by AI. This is a real face-to-face, in-person way of making an impression. To reveal something personal about you that doesn't necessarily fit so well on a CV, intangibles, these soft skills. Too many people respond to tell me about yourself by reciting their resume. This candidate shows something beyond what is on the page. That is the chance of the face-to-face interview. Everything you're saying is already on the CV. Why just repeat it without more context? The Mount Everest example doesn't just show that they are a risk taker or they like climbing mountains. It revealed that they were adventurous, curious, goal-orientated and disciplined, and also had the ability to apply lessons learned from past experiences to new challenges. The follow-up question is another part of the interview that throws a lot of people off. There's the first question, which you might expect, but there's a follow-up based on your answer. You have to explain a little bit more about why you answered the question the way you did. So I always like to prepare for interviews with 2 tiers. The first tier is the question that sets up the follow-up, and you already have a follow-up answer ready to go. If your response to the first question is a dead end or is a yes, no kind of answer, you won't be able to predict what the follow-up question the interviewer asks is going to be. The follow-up question to tell me about yourself and, I climbed Mount Everest and the highest mountains in the world. The first thought that ran through your head upon reaching the summit of Mount Everest. This is a bit of a tricky question because you could show off and be a bit of an egotistical narcissist there and say, well, look, no one else has done it. I'm the best. She laughed and said, how the heck am I going to get down? And it showed her ability to engage with others with humor and humility. So you're showing these intangible communication skills in the face-to-face job interview is a very specific skill set that most of us don't have. Be memorable. You don't need to be a world-class mountaineer to stand out in a job interview, but what you can do is take a risk to get personal. Instead of showing off all the work projects you've been involved with, again, that should be on your CV. You should share a short anecdote, personal information that will allow the interviewer to know something about your life outside of work. But hopefully that is something that ties directly into an attribute that you use in your work all the time. The example I give would be, outside of my work, I'm a YouTuber and podcaster. Hey, I need to communicate and teach online to students all across the world. So being a YouTuber in my spare time, doing a podcast, gives me practice at communicating using these digital media, and that allows me to be much more effective. Don't be boring. Hey, that's easier said than done. Everyone thinks they're very interesting, but actually a lot of the stuff is very boring. And I think answering that question of boredom is really variable. It depends on your audience. If you're interviewing for an accounting firm, that's a very different audience than interviewing for a creative ad agency. Their tolerance for the mundane, let's say, is very different in those different fields. So I think the key to overcome that hurdle of boredom is 2 things. You have to show your purpose and passion, and to be able to answer the question indirectly, why do you get up every morning? Not only does it have to demonstrate your purpose and passion, you have to be authentic. Don't tell the employers the answer you think they want to hear. Be authentic to you. It may not be your dream job forever, but you know exactly why you're applying for this job at this point in time. And that in itself shows you're self-aware, another really important soft skill when applying for jobs. Thank you for listening and watching. My name is Jack. See you next time around.